Hi, everybody. My name's Jay Aigner. Welcome to the First Customer Podcast. We talk to founders about, you guessed it, how they got their first customer. This episode and every episode is sponsored by my company, JDAQA Software Testing. We're your one-stop shop for manual, automated, performance, and security testing. Check us out at jdaqa.com. And with that, let's get on with the show. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the First Customer Podcast. My name is Jay Aigner. Today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Joe Roushar, which I clarified before we started here. Joe, welcome.
Hello. Thank you.
So, Joe, you've got a very cool, varied background. Like we were talking a little bit beforehand. You've been doing AI since before it was cool, so I'm sure we'll kind of get to that at some point along the way. But tell me a little bit about your background. Where'd you grow up?
Grew up in Minneapolis, and I liked studying foreign languages when I was a kid. So even in high school, I'd studied German and French, and I went to Mexico and learned a little Spanish. And so from a very early time, a natural language understanding was really important to me. And
Very cool. Where did that come from? Did you have anybody in your family or anything, or?
I don't know. But I know that when I traveled, I liked to be able to talk to people. And so in my undergraduate degree, I got a degree in linguistics. And while I was doing my master's work at University of Minnesota and also graduate research at Tokyo Institute of Technology, I studied Shizen Gengo Joho Shori. And you hear the word Joho in there. That means natural language processing.
Wow. How did you end up in Japan?
I was first there as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and later I went as a soldier. I was an intelligence officer with the U.S. Army.
Wow. And you went back after that?
I did.
You loved it so much?
I did. I loved it so much. And
Do you go I was gonna say, do you go back still?
Occasionally.
Very cool. So talk to me a little bit about after college. You kind of, it seems like very early on had an idea of where you wanted to go. But where did you go after all those different degrees and you know the variations of all that stuff?
After I got out of the Army, I went to a company called Secure Computing Technology Corporation, which later became Secure Computing, and worked on bulk encryption devices and stuff for mostly government customers.
Okay. Yeah, I saw you started out very heavy technically, a lot of architect roles across a bunch of different companies.
Yep.
Talk to me about kind of how you transitioned from, you know, those initial engagements as a consultant or a technical, you know, kind of programmer into the architect role.
My first architect role was just prior to Y2K at American Express Financial Advisors, now Ameriprise. And I was helping them. My data and programming background enabled me to understand broadly the challenges that they were facing associated with Y2K. And that was a great way for me to wet my feet. I also worked for United Health during that time. And I was doing architecture-related work starting in the late 90s. And then I joined United Health as a senior architect for one of their divisions called Optum, when it was much smaller than it is today. And it just blossomed from there.
So did you always have the itch to found something, or did that develop throughout your career?
I did not think of myself as an entrepreneur when I was younger, but I decided to give it a shot, and I really liked it.
And what was your first attempt at that?
My first attempt was called Intuitive Dimensions. And I was already working on solving the natural language understanding problem. And I started to build out this what later became my blog site, but what was originally just a big I was using Asymmetric's Toolbook, if you remember that, to create just a large multi-chapter online document. And then I transitioned that into my blog, understandingcontext.com.
So what was your goal with understanding context? I saw that when I was looking through things. What was your kind of overarching goal for that?
The same as today. That is to build the universal translator. I saw C3PO on the big screen, and I thought, we should be able to do that. And yet, everything I saw in production was language pairs, one language to one other, no ability to go from one to many. And the reason for that is that they were using neural network style learning processes that were based on patterns. And when you're using raw patterns, you can only really do the left brain, and you can only really do very limited translation. And no matter how large the language model gets, the accuracy in translation from one to many is going to be limited until you incorporate concepts in context. By putting concepts in context and using meaning as the basis for understanding and translating language rather than patterns, suddenly you open up the possibility of a universal translator.
Wow. I constantly, the Chat GPT rate, is all the rage right now, and it still feels like context is like the human element that it's missing. And
that's right, and that's one of the reasons why there's been such a massive ecosystem of prompt vendors who are teaching people how to talk to it.
Right.
And the fundamental premise I began with was that we don't want to train the person to talk to the computer. We've been doing that for decades, and it still is clunky, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We want to train the computer to understand what the human says, and that means resolving ambiguity. Language has a thing called polysemy, multiple meanings, and there are words like set in English that could have literally dozens of different interpretations. And in order to really understand your intent, in order to read your mind based on what you said, you need to be able to resolve ambiguity. And to be able to do that, you need a meaning-based strategy. But there are other advantages to using a meaning-based strategy to interact with a person. First of all, you get explainability. Explainability has been important in AI since the very beginning, and neural networks don't give you that because the knowledge is encoded in this pattern of, nodes, which is fundamentally not explainable. There's another issue associated with AI that doesn't use concepts in context, and that is the inability to use attribution. So if you learn something from Encyclopedia Britannica, or if you learn something from reading Plato, you want to be able to say that. Because then if a person, for example, is using your interaction tool to help research a paper, they'll be able to put in a bibliography. And if not, they won't. Right. And this is huge, especially in an era when fake news, bias, and other deep fakes are becoming the norm.
Wow. I did not think I was going to find somebody so well-versed in the hot topics of today. So I'm glad that we're talking. So you made the blog site Understanding Context, but now I understand the context of that blog. Talk to me about your next steps from there. Where'd you go after that? And maybe Ike AI was next. I'm not sure. Tell me kind of where you went from there.
Well, I formed the company Intuitive Dimensions, and it failed. And so I formed a company called EPACA, EPACCA. That harks back to my enterprise architect scruples. It means enterprise process and content coordination architecture. And my idea is that the Americans are all focused on data, and the Europeans are all focused on process. And you really need both. And you really need both in order to be able to efficiently implement AI. And so this whole process and content architecture model led me to form, first after Intuitive Dimensions was a company called Knowledge Genetica, shortened Kinetica. And I got a couple $1 million of investment, including a bunch of my own. And we were able to sell our product to a company called Blue Cross Blue Shield in Minnesota. That product was called I Speak Your Language. And it included kind of the Swiss Army knife for integrating enterprise applications. And specifically what it did was it enabled call center agents in Blue Cross to be able to have a single interface into 8, 9 different systems. And with that single interface, they were able to much more effectively answer questions about claims and benefits and things that an insurer's call center does. This is the foundation for hyperautomation for AI. And so the workflow, the inference engine for forward and backward chaining inference, and all of those things are an important part, along with the adapter factory for connecting to all of the different enterprise systems, including those containing content, unstructured information, and data, structured information. And the ability to do this is really important to be able to integrate AI. Because even if you can engage in dialogue with a person and understand their intent, unless you can integrate with the exact same concepts in context in the enterprise, it's going to be very costly to bring business value. And that's what our whole point is that wow. We, and by the way, I've switched from talking about translation to talk about just interpretation. Mm-hmm. It turns out that before you can really expect to be able to translate to many different languages, you have to know that you understand what a person's talking about.
Right.
And so this is the springboard. That is, to be able to understand a user's intent in a business, be able to use external data and internal data to be able to help them achieve whatever business value they're trying to do, whether it's associated with marketing or finance or IT or whatever part of the business they're in. If you can understand their intent and bring value to them by connecting to their data and content, we know that we're able to understand and we can go to the next big step, which is the universal translator.
Well, I do want to, so I think I'm just as interested and maybe a little bit painful, but why did that first business fail? It sounds like you had a lot of success in your subsequent businesses. Why did that one fail?
I didn't hire the right people.
And can you elaborate a little? Like what were some of the pain points, and how did you recognize that? And was it just an after the fact that you realized that you hired the wrong people?
I hired a person to run the company. I like being the geek. And I hired a person to run the company who decided he wanted to take it over and get rid of me. That was my first hint.
All right, fair enough. So you did the Blue Cross and Blue Shield. You had a bunch of businesses with acronyms that I probably can't even pronounce or remember all the names in them. But keep walking me through the journey, because it sounds like you just kind of kept building on the previous lessons that you learned as you kind of spawned off these new entities. Where did you go next?
After the Blue Cross, and that was with Knowledge Genetica, I went to IPACA.
Right.
I struggled for years to overcome the challenges of starting up a new company. And one of the things I did was I insisted upon paying my debts, and so the SBA loan and stuff that I took out, I insisted on paying that, and so that took me a while. But as a consulting enterprise architect, I was able to earn enough money to feed myself and get the company back on its feet. I at With Epaka, I transitioned the software from being a premise-based to software as a service, cloud-based. And I learned all about Azure and AWS and Google Cloud Platform, and I learned a lot about performance. And obviously, when you're doing heavyweight AI, performance is a big issue. And in my roles as enterprise architect, I was able to learn a lot about those things. And I have had additional sales and additional opportunities to expand the software. And right now, I've formed a company called Joho AI. As I mentioned, that means news or intelligence. Mm-hmm. When I was an intelligence officer in Japan, they called my division Johobu, or the intelligence division. And so, at any rate, all those steps have led me to a place where I'm really confident that this time we're going to be able to deliver the value that we have been talking about all along.
Right. So many questions. So talk to me a little bit about some of your first customers. I mean, you spawned off so many businesses. Let's cover it, I guess, a little more generally speaking. What were some of the ways, and I'm interested too, because as a more technical and maybe, less businessy, less salesy kind of guy, how did you acquire those first customers? Who were you don't have to name names, but who were those first customers generally speaking? And then how did you kind of engage with them?
It was all through networking, often through people that I knew very well. So my first customer I met at an event, and my first two customers, in fact. Blue Cross was my third customer, and they were introduced to me by one of my coworkers. I was in the Minnesota Army National Guard, and my superior, Lieutenant Colonel Warren G. Herod II, introduced me to the folks at Blue Cross. Later, I had a large contract with a sale to a company called Amplify Capital. And once again, it was networking. People I met in the course of putting myself out there turned out to be the opportunities for customers. It turns out that Dan Herbeck, who introduced me to Amplify, had also been working at United Health, and I had consulted at United Health for a long time. Mm-hmm. So that's been the way it's worked. It turns out that my current partners, my co-founders, Chris Higby and Mike Lopez, were introduced to me by my son, who's a chiropractor.
I always hear I like to refer to it as the friends and family plan. There's always, it's the network you build. And I am curious, it sounds like you maybe had to work on that a little bit to step out of, being the geek, as you like to call yourself. And I mean, I used to run a text-based multiplayer video game out of my basement. So like I can commiserate with you being a geek. I have a, development background. So how did you learn to network and step out of, kind of the traditional programmer, withdrawn guy in the corner typing on the keyboard? Like, how did you break out of that?
I am naturally a little more gregarious, and I love people. And so I guess that wasn't as big an issue for me. And I think there's one other crazy thing, and that is my undergraduate degree was in linguistics, English, right? Talking is my thing.
That's fair. That is fair. So I this question is something that I have varying answers to, but I'm really curious with you, with all of kind of like the progression towards Joho and kind of like now you've, feel like you've got the pieces to provide the answer to the question you've been asking the whole time, which is the universal kind of translator. If you had to start over today with everything you've learned before, what would be step one?
That's a really, really good question. In my undergraduate studies, I learned a programming language called Snowball. And our teacher, Wayne Tosh, asked us to build simple translation programs because Snowball is designed for string processing. And when I worked on my master's degree at University of Minnesota in the Computer Information Science Department, my advisor was Dr. James Slagle, amazing man, blind chess champion of the world. And he turned me on to expert systems. He had written one of the first. And the progression of doing it just worked out great for me. I started out thinking about process using the programming language. Next, expert systems are based on models. And the model involves having a knowledge representation scheme that is going to be efficient and complete. And that was my big challenge for the first 6-7 years of working on this, developing a knowledge representation scheme that would actually perform well enough to be able to do this on computers that, are digital. So the process focus and then the content focus and putting them together worked out to enable me to file my first patent and get it awarded. The patent was filed in 2002 and it was awarded in 2007. So I don't think I would do things differently. Working with, in the University of Minnesota, I studied in the Computer and Information Science Department, but I did a lot of my courses in the Neuroscience Department and in the Department of Educational Psychology to learn about learning. And all of those things just helped a lot.
Right. That's all very insightful. And kind of a follow-up would be, if you had to start a new business tomorrow with the knowledge that you've learned, and I have to be very specific because I think you're probably the most articulate linguist I've ever probably spoken to. So, if you had to start a new business tomorrow based on everything you've learned before, what would be step one?
Surround myself with people who can. Find people that have the business acumen to be able to start a business. And I've learned that people who run big businesses and people who run startups have completely different mindsets. And so I would really look for partners who had a proven track record, as my new partners, Chris Higbee and Mike Lopez, do in startups. This would be absolutely critical. And it's where I failed originally. But we learn from failure.
Yes, we do. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. What are some things, I typically ask for 3, but what are 3 things that you're doing to stay healthy, to increase your longevity, to stay sharp, to kind of make sure you're around for a long time? What are 3 things you're working on?
I'm 64 years old, and I have long been very, very serious about my diet. My mom was a Mayo Clinic trained nurse and dietitian, and she taught me how to eat well, and that's really important to me. I walk. My ikigai, my exercise program is walking. So I walk 4 miles a day. And I I've been able to stay healthy. I intend to continue this.
But you look
Uh,
healthy.
well, thank you. I also um, intensively study new stuff all the time. You have to be a lifelong learner in order to be competitive, especially in this industry. And so I'm studying multiple languages. I study technology uh, every day, and I try to keep the saw blade sharp.
I love every single one of those. Um, I typically end it here, but I have another question. Just very topical. How do you feel about the safeguards that people are worrying about putting up for AI? What's your thought on
This
it?
this is a critical question. Nick Bostrom wrote a book called Superintelligence that really deals very well with this question and points out the risks. And um, Chris and Mike and I are working on establishing relationships with local groups and with governments to start articulating a framework for putting guardrails around AI. Nothing could be more important right now because, as Nick Bostrom pointed out in his book, once a thing learns enough to learn by itself, it will rapidly become a superintelligence. And we have an apperceptive learning model which builds concepts and contexts upon each other, just like a child learns. And there will be a point at which it achieves the ability to not only learn concepts by itself, but also learn languages by itself. And that's the way it will go beyond, the few hundred languages that are currently digitized to be able to translate hundreds and hundreds of languages. This will be valuable because there are people for example, Indonesia has hundreds of languages. And these are people with valuable knowledge that if they could share it with us, it would be a blessing to the human race. The problem is with the hallucinations, fake news, bias that exist in AIs without guardrails. And in the wrong hands, these tools could become very destructive.
And is it the wrong hands part that is the real problem, you think, or is it some sort of sentience to these things that we should be worried about?
I've seen the Terminator, and I understand the premise, but I don't see that as realistic. I see the real problem as human beings, and even good people doing bad things um, because they're lazy, for example, and cheat on their paper or whatever. Um, it can be a real problem when a teacher blames a student for plagiarizing, and the online tool that they're using for checking that gives a false positive, that does damage to that student. Well, whenever a student is accused of cheating, my son in ninth grade was accused of cheating, and he didn't. I mean, he's just a smart kid. And this false positives, false negatives problem is a huge issue. And so we're going to have to put our best minds together to put guardrails around this.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest misnomer to the general public who aren't really involved, in a day to day. Is there They laugh off the guardrail conversation as the Terminator. They're like, that's not really good. But that's not really where the risk is. Like you said, it is corporations or people or whoever with the technology in their hands that can do things that we're not really anticipating. So I think that's a great way to put it. But Well, let's end it there. This was fantastic. I can't tell you how impressed I'm going to walk away from this call. Just a very kind, articulate, maybe the smartest guest I've ever had and will ever have on this call. So thank you for giving me some of your very valuable time today. If people are looking to check you out, looking to check Joho out, where can they find you?
Joe, Joe, at Joho, Joho.ai.
All right. Well, I will send people your way, and hopefully I get the big news that the universal translator has been built, and we can all just, Babelfish and all those days of trying to figure things out, between languages will be over. So, Joe, thank you so much, my friend. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the nice spring weather, hopefully, out where you are, and we'll catch up again soon, all right?
Thank you, Jay. You're way too kind. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it, buddy.
Goodbye.